We might get kick-started as we start with a little bit of intro. Bonnie, I'm going to let you kick us off today, and it's great to see everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining us. And if you'll continue to kind of tell us where in the world you are today, that's great. It's always good to see this global audience. Welcome to advocating. Well, I keep calling it advocating, but advocacy for ethical AI implementation, a voice for responsible communication. And so ultimately, I think we're trying to get to a point of where we have this voice of advocation. Um, this is part of the webinar series for the Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management for Ethics First Month, which is in February. So we hope you will join. I think this is the second webinar, and we have a couple more coming. So I hope you'll be able to join us for all of those webinars. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Center for Strategic Communications Excellence and Reputation Lighthouse. I'm Bonnie Caver, a board member of the Global Alliance, and I'm joined today by Dr. Ann Gregory, Professor Emeritus of Corporate Communication at the University of Huddersfield. And then we have Adrian Cropley, founding partner of the Center for Strategic Communications Excellence. Today we're going to focus. I think when we sat down and started to talk about this session, we could do a master class. We could do a full conference. There is so much to talk about, and even from the moment we started planning this till today, there have been changes and things that have influenced our conversation as things are happening every single day. Today, though, we're going to try to focus on a few areas. One is kind of understanding the ethics of AI and getting a little deep into that. Then how can we be a champion for responsible AI, not only as individuals, but also in our roles as communication and PR professionals, and then empowering our voice. We've also left a good bit of time for questions because we think that that's the biggest thing that happens is when communication and PR professionals from around the world get together, we can learn from each other. So we've left a good chunk of our day for Q&A. So we will have time for that at the end, but also please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and hopefully between the three of us, we'll be monitoring the chat from time to time. So that's kind of the getting the administrivia out of the way. And I wanted to start by talking about responsible AI. And that is kind of this moving target of how do we define responsible AI. And you have to understand what responsible AI is because it comes into this intersection of ethical AI and responsible communications. So I thought, hey, let's just start and think about how we can define responsible AI. And I've got just a couple of thoughts here, and I'm going to look here and share. It's always good to have just a little bit of some visual instead of you just hearing me talk. So IBM defines responsible artificial intelligence as a set of principles that help guide the design, development, deployment, and use of AI, building trust in AI solutions that have potential to empower organizations and their stakeholders. Responsible AI involves the consideration of a
leave the car.
broader societal impact
No,
of
leave it
AI
there.
systems
Just leave it. No,
and
just leave it,
measures.
because when we go, we'll be taking my car.
Fiona.
Sorry.
Hi, Fiona. It's great to hear from you. So basically, IBM was one of the first technology organizations to actually implement their AI. And if you look at Microsoft, they have a responsible AI, but they're very technically based. So I was like, well, let's look at how we might define it. So Chat GPT and me, and that's the way I think we should think about technology completely, is how is the human plus the technology working together. And so we defined it as responsible AI as the design, development, deployment, and use of AI systems in ways that are ethical, transparent, accountable, and aligned with human values, organizational purpose, and societal good. Responsible AI ensures that AI supports, not undermines, trust, fairness, privacy, and inclusion while minimizing harm and bias. Then I went a little further and said, okay, as communication and PR leaders, how should we define it? And responsible AI is the intentional and transparent integration of AI into business operations, decision-making, and customer experiences in ways that uphold organizational values, build stakeholder trust, and protect people from unintended harm. So we'll talk about that a little later, but it's nice to start thinking about defining responsible AI. And we did that a year ago, almost a year ago, as part of the Global Alliance. And we worked on guiding principles. And so I just wanted to talk about the guiding principles for ethical and responsible artificial intelligence. And when you look at these 6 global AI guiding principles, they are built on the foundation of ethics. They're not focused on ethics alone. They're assuming that you have an ethical foundation to build upon. Because at the very beginning, we talk about the 16 principles of ethics from the Global Alliance, as well as abiding by the principles of your associations and laws, et cetera. So we're already thinking that governance and ethics are foundational to everything we do, but then we're going to build on top of that. So we created 6 global AI guiding principles, and they are ethical rigor, human oversight and governance, personal and organizational responsibility, openness and transparency, professional development, and advocacy. Advocacy is our topic today. But when we look at this, people say, well, where's security and where's privacy and where are all those things? And if you read through this, they're kind of built underneath it. So, if we're looking at human oversight, that's where human-led outputs to avoid plagiarism and trademark and copyright infringements. And how are we looking at misinformation and disinformation? When we're looking at personal responsibility, we're looking at how are we looking at research and due diligence. But this, as I said earlier, this is a moving target. So just because we did the ethical the responsible guidelines a year ago, we need to work on them again. So we're going to be updating those as part of an AI symposium with the Global Alliance in Italy in May. And later on, we will introduce you to a survey that's going to give you all a voice. We'd love for you to be with us in Italy, but even if you can't be with us in Italy, this gives you a voice in where are we in responsible communication around AI? What is responsible AI mean to the communications and PR profession so that we can continue to update and make those 6 guiding principles part of where we are a moving fluid document for our organization for us to look at. So that just kind of gives us a little foundation to think about and to start. I know we have a lot of conversations to come, but I'd like to kind of kick that off to my partners here in crime, Adrian and Ann, and just as an introduction, you guys have some things to add to this conversation at this point.
I'll be a gentleman, and I was going to say to let Anne go first, but while I've got unmute, and what I think, one of the things that I think is really essential at this time is that we're in that early explorer stage. AI has come onto the scene and it's just hit us with a bang, but it has been around for years. And as some of our colleagues around the world that have really got heavy into the tech have said, you know, we've been dealing with AI for years. It's only since Gen AI has come onto the scene that everybody's kind of getting involved with it. But one of the observations, certainly over the last 20 years in communication, is that we let social media get away from us. And I think allowing that to get away from us and not getting ahead in it because we had our heads down and our bums up and we were doing the do of the creation in communication. We can no longer do that as professionals right now. We need to be in that exploration. And, you know, as Bonnie was saying about, we're now really trying to define and get our heads around what we mean by responsible AI within our profession. We'll talk that through a little bit later. But I think there's some real opportunities now for us to explore in safe environments. One of the links that I've shared in chat is that at the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, we have an AI forum. And we've purposely made it a place where people don't feel intimidated when they don't know stuff about AI, because we all don't really know stuff about AI. We are exploring. And yes, there's the pioneers who are embracing tools and getting into it, but we need to have those conversations and share some of those learnings. So that's the big encouragement at this stage, is that we're evolving. There's no one definition. There's no one right or wrong when it comes to AI, but we are now learning and exploring.
And I'm just going to hand it over to you at this point, because ethics is so foundational to our world of AI, and how are we going to succeed and thrive in an AI-driven world?
Sorry about that, Bonnie. Did you just ask me to contribute then? Sorry,
I've handed it over to you from ethics perspective.
Well, thank
absolutely.
You. Oh, okay. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for your introduction. And I think we're at really at a crucial point here. I don't think it was coincidental that at the big EU summit last week, the title was AI for Good. And they were really advocating there for responsible use of AI. Unfortunately, the US and the UK were not one of the 57 signatories to the declaration that came out at the end of that. And then we can explore maybe why that was. But I think in ethics in AI is not new, actually. It was back in 2018 that an Italian called Floridi did some work on ethics for good. And that was to try and put some ethical impetus behind thinking in the AI industry itself. So the AI industry itself has been quite hot on the track of ethics for some while. But I think maybe we need to step back, because as you said, quite right, Bonnie, you know, we can leap straight away into things like privacy and all the minutiae of ethics. But I think it's quite salutary to actually stand back and understand what the big picture on this and what AI is doing to our world, because we don't all, well, we work for organizations, but that's not our only role. Our discourse goes out there into the world, and we are responsible for generating a lot of the discourse in the public space. And therefore being mindful of the impact of that, I think, is really important. So just one or two things that I think we need to bear in mind that are things for us to consider. And sometimes we don't step back far enough because we're worrying about the ethics of generating certain types of content, for example. But if we think that AI is driven by the big tech companies, And some of them, well, most of them are now larger than huge country economies. And some of them are supported by their governments in their ambitions, depending on where their HQs reside. And these companies have their own agendas. And they're not all that transparent, but we can be sure that one of the items on that agenda will be commerce and their bottom line. And the tech company is very powerful, but they're not accountable. And you mentioned, you know, the work of ethical codes. This has been going on now probably, well, almost 10 years in AI. And research by scholars like Hagendorf and Boddington and others say that nearly all these AI companies, big tech companies, have ethical codes. But they are largely put on one side in the white heat of innovation and excitement, or they're used for PR purposes. Hagendorf and Boddington's words, not mine. So they don't want regulation, a lot of them, because they prefer self-regulation, because that means then that they can control the legislative agenda. And one of the challenges is, of course, transnational legislation is very difficult. So a lot of the drivers behind AI are purely commercial, and we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking through whether or not that commercial exploitation leads for societal good. And we know there are lots of good things about AI, about, you know, health, about science, about energy innovations, etc., etc., etc. But there's an awful lot that's bad in AI as well, but it makes a lot of money. So we have to be mindful, I think, of the accountabilities that maybe we should be calling out in some of the huge uses of AI, where, you know, we're talking today in the news about a war in Ukraine, drone technology and AI technology and weapons of mass destruction are really, you know, things for us to worry about and that we should be mindful of. And I think the second point around who drives AI, it's big tech. It's, you know, the nature of society is changing. It's becoming mediated. Truth is technologically driven. And a phrase that terrifies me is that we must be data driven in our decision making. No, we shouldn't. We should be data informed. You know, and we're now getting to a stage where organizational decision making is based on algorithms which may or may not be ethical, which may or may not be biased. And we need to remember, you know, mis and dis and malinformation, a lot of this is promoted through, some of it's not intentional, as we know, but it's driven by a technology that generates a lot of stuff that people do not know whether or not it's true. And they have no real means of checking, and it's changing the nature of our societies, as well as creating, you know, whole nations and groups of people who are now going to be a new underclass because they don't have the resources to tap into AI. It's also changing the nature of our relationships, I think, again, mediated. And I've just been reviewing some papers today for a journal where people just cannot tell the difference between humans and chatbots anymore. They can't. And, you know, we forget that these are data gathering machines. And we use them a lot in the practice, and we're using agents of all sorts in practice. And what are the implications of that? It's changing the nature of our relationships. Human beings are being defined by the sum of their data parts, and that's wrong. You know, we're holistic. We have needs that are not expressed through data. And we have precious relationships that need nurturing in ways that are not concerned with data gathering and digitalization, but with that are concerned about respect and the intrinsic worth of human beings. Nature of work is changing. For the first time ever, knowledge workers are now threatened, not the production workers. And we think in our own world, content generation, a huge amount of our work is now being gobbled up by AI, which poses a question about what we're going to be left doing. And ethical questions about what are we going to do with those people who are not AI trained? Are they going to be just chucked on the scrap heap? In our organizations, in the quest for efficiency and effectiveness, we have a responsibility as well for the people we put out of work, not just the state. So what are we going to do about those who are left behind? Huge ethical questions. And people will knock on the PR door to ask for answers to these questions. In your quest for efficiency, company X, what are your responsibilities to your workers? And then, a final big picture issue is really about the environmental issues. It's estimated that between 2023 and 2026, AI energy consumption will increase tenfold. And some companies are thinking about installing nuclear reactors to support their AI activities. I mean, this is just crazy environmentally. So, responsible use of AI is also, I'm talking to myself as as somebody in the PR profession. There I am. I've got ChatGPT, on the sidelines all day. I've got image generation going all day. I've got, data summarization software going all day, and it's gobbling up energy. So responsible use of AI in our profession reflects all these things about, well, what is our relationship with tech? How are we changing society? What do we think the nature of relationship should be in the future? And what are we going to do about the changing nature of work, and what's that going to mean? And are we responsible in our use of energy and the footprint that AI is placing on the world, and the demands that it's going to make for energy production are at the moment rising exponentially. So that's enough for me, but I just wanted us to step back a little bit, because we operate within a context. And the way that we discuss things, I think, needs to take into account that bigger context as well.
So what I want to do is kind of take this forward a little bit, building on what Bonnie and Anne has said. And it's really starting to challenge us as we say, so how do we look at our role, and how is that evolving, and how do we advocate and champion for AI? And I just want to share a couple of things just to set a little bit of context. Because if we look at, and Bonnie talked about the definition, and as well about the definitions of responsible AI has come from the tech industry. So their focus on things like fairness, transparency, accountability are all words being used. But what does that mean from tech companies? Who's holding them to account? Where are the policies being generated? And who's the person that's in their ear and reminding them of those things? And I think this is where communication comes into play, but we've got to broaden our definition around responsible AI as well. So we need to include, obviously, the ethics, the storytelling, the public discourse, the understanding and taking people on that journey. Because responsible AI is about how AI impacts people, not just compliance and regulation. We've been on this journey as communication professionals for a long time now, where we're saying that we are the trusted advisors at that executive level within organizations, or at that management level. And we've got to take that responsibility to uphold those ethical standards and lead the conversations around it. So discourse within organizations and industry as a whole is really important here. But the role goes beyond shaping policy. And this was a conversation we were having this week, Bonnie, wasn't it, with a couple of colleagues, that it is not just about shaping policy within organizations. It's not just about the ethics involved with AI, but it is about the culture that we have within an organization that says, what do we stand for? What are our values? And in fact, what are our morals? And for communication professionals, it's really about coaching leaders, guiding the public conversations, and ensuring AI communication is aligned with those organization values. One of the things, sorry, I'll just pop forward with this, is I don't know when people saw this released a few weeks ago, and I've got some thoughts around Antigua et Nova that was released from the Vatican. And what I thought was important, and it's not that I'm pushing a particular barrel when it comes to religion, but the reality is where are the morals and the ethics and that junction coming forward to inform how we look at AI in that bigger picture? So we can do some overlays, because from the Vatican, they really talked about AI's role in upholding human dignity, justice, and the truth. But also, AI should serve humanity and not dictate or replace human decision making. So it was really focusing on that human as in the heart of responsible AI. And so it should start reflecting some of those principles. So as we start on this journey of helping to define what do we mean by responsible AI within the PR and communication professional, we need to start taking a little bit more of the moral as well as ethical stance around this. So there is that morality factor, and it runs deeper than ethics, and it comes to the heart of culture within an organization as a whole. And we need to ensure that AI is not widening that polarization gap that we've seen over the last few years, looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer, and we have polarization of opinion. It's being widened by AI now because messages are much quicker, responsive, they get out there, and that disinformation, misinformation, as Anne was talking about, is creating that bigger gap unless we start putting some of those guidelines in place and start championing for the role. So I had a bit of a play with AI as well, and said, look, if we take these two pieces of information around technical definitions and the learnings from more the moral stance on AI, we start evolving the definition. And this is the continuing conversation. But we start picking up on things like human dignity. And human dignity and things like empowerment should enhance human intelligence. And communication should really ensure that AI is framed as a tool that serves people, not one that defines it. And this goes back to what Anne was saying. That ethical oversight, that transparency, I think is really important because it's all about decisions around policies and application of AI. So there is some grounding or base things that we need to talk about. It is about fairness and inclusion. Just in the last week here in Australia, we had one of our politicians follow a Trump theme and say, internal communication professionals, people working in DE&I and change managers were really a waste of space within government and a waste of resources. Those types of conversations, as much as we object to them, are going to be real issues moving forward because our role will absolutely be questioned. We start looking at things like AI for the common good. It's much bigger than it is about the business and what business is doing. Obviously, we bring out the themes of human oversight being at the core of what we talk about in AI, and things like creative collaboration. So where we work between organizations and individuals and wider society in understanding how AI applies in the wider world. So they're just some thoughts. I think we play a really key role as communication professionals in education, and that's education of all of our stakeholders, from leaders to employees to the general public, educating them on responsible AI. We've got this great role in being able to shape the AI narratives. How do we take people on that journey of understanding and applying AI in that responsible way? But I think one of the biggest roles we have going forward is going to be this advocating role for responsible AI. We have to have an opinion. You heard what Anne was talking about before, and they're passionate topics that we need to have that opinion on, and we need to lead that discourse. We need to be able to really push back on some of the things that we hear in public about AI usage and responsible use of AI. So I think that those roles in education is going to be critical. And the final thing I just want to quickly talk about is this is a journey, I think, together between academia and corporate training. So when we look at that training aspect, we need to partner very clearly, if you're working in the corporate world, with academia in being able to fund and drive more research-driven training, because we need to dive into these topics and then educate and collaborate with business between the academia world and the business world, and being able to drive some of these things. So I think there's a clear role. We often talk about the role of academia is getting people to that standard and business ready. In corporate training, we take people on that journey of then applying that learning and how that translates into the business world. But unless people have that foundation of ethical, responsible AI, they're not going to apply it in the workplace, and we're playing catch up. And our target is really about teaching and coaching and leading and educating our leaders in AI. And I think we have a really, really big role in that one. Okay, so I'm going to put the share now, because we'll come back to resources, but I'd love to get Bonnie, and if some of the things that you're talking about, is there any points that you want to bring up just talking about that?
Yeah, and for me, I there's some real interesting things in there, like the human dignity piece. So much of our lives, our dignity and pride has been around our jobs. We associate our brands with our jobs, status in life, ability to change your status and be able to move from one place in life to another, and have a better life, have better education. All of that has come around jobs. And so when we're talking about the potential of an AI that will take away our jobs, and not just our jobs, but CEO jobs are even on the chopping block if you begin to look at it. So this human dignity, this brain drain of, here we have, it's kind of like, how many of you can do hard math now, because you probably can pick up a calculator. I picked up a calculator to do something that was very, very simple the other day, and my husband was laughing at me and saying, "Did you really just put that into a calculator? I mean, really? Could you have not done that little simple?" But we get to the point where we're using tools at a level that maybe we're not thinking. So there's this brain drain. And then I also, the whole energy thing is such a challenge, because we're so far behind. I've been on calls with South Africa, where they're having rolling blackouts, India, where there's not power. So been in Austin, Texas, where our power grid failed. So we already have those challenges from an infrastructure perspective, and we have all of these goals around sustainability, and now we're just destroying them. So at what point do we have this challenge from a ethical, responsible side of things? I do have this really this book that I'm if you guys haven't read it, it's a very interesting read called Irreplaceable by Pascal Bornet. And it talks about a lot of this, but it also talks about, what is our future as human beings in an AI-driven world. But some really interesting points there, Adrian and Anne, when we're looking at that foundational ethics. So that kind of leads into how do we empower our voice? Because we certainly, as communication and PR professionals, need to have a voice in this. In fact, I believe we need to lead this. So what are the things we need to do to have that voice?
And any thoughts at this stage?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Adrian and Bonnie. There's a couple of things maybe I'd just put in. They're not entirely random, I promise you. But if I could just share a couple of things with you very briefly. So this slide here, is the European AI Act. And if anybody does business with Europe from now on, they will have to comply with the AI Act. And these are the 6 principles of the AI Act. And I'm not going to go through them all. The point that I want to make here is that the ethics was done before the Act was drafted. And I think this is an interesting way around of doing things. I mentioned Florida, who led a group called the AI for Good, and he and colleagues came up with some basic ethical principles which are based on health ethics, which have been around for absolutely years, and that's beneficence, do good, non-malfeasance, don't do harm, autonomy, that's the rights of human beings to live as human beings without undue control, justice, which is about fairness, and he added another one, which was explicability. And then the EU designed its legislation to comply with the ethical framework. So I think the way that we often do things in our profession is that we do stuff, and then we think through the ethics of it. Instead of saying, this is the ethical bucket into which everything has to fit. So respect for human agency is number 1 on the ethics by design approach by the EU. And by that, they mean no undue manipulation of human decision-making. AI systems shouldn't deceive or coerce or create unhealthy attachments. And I'm thinking about, what we do in stakeholder engagement. Could we apply those principles to ourselves in public relations? We're wanting to create attachments. We're wanting to create dependencies very often. And on the personal privacy element, it talks about data minimization and completeness, making sure that data sets are complete, not biased in any way, and giving people control over their data. And we're about data maximization very often. We want to know all about our stakeholders so that we can, quote, drive their behavior. You combine this, with behavioral economics. I think there's some serious questions for us to begin to ask ourselves as a profession. Fairness about preventing discrimination and ensuring equitable treatment of everybody, including those who don't have AI capabilities, nations, groups, whatever. You know, what are the principles of fairness about this? And what about accessibility and the implication of us emphasizing digital channels? We do all our social listening online. We disenfranchise whole groups of people by doing that. We've covered the environmental element there, but transparency. I mean, the EU is asking, and oversight and accountability is asking for logging tracking systems of AI as it is being developed. Would we dare, as a profession, log and track all our decisions and make them open to public scrutiny? You know, so I think there's some challenges here about whether or not we, and I'm glad, you know, the Italy meeting is happening. You know, how do we base our professional ethics, and do we need to really begin to adjust them? And I'll just go on, sorry, I won't go through all those, but I might come back to them. Again, looking at our own capabilities and how we enact this, we match the global capability framework with the best or most uses of AI. Here is where AI is most used around the edge here. You see immediately in the communication space, there's loads and loads of AI where it is doing our job. Here around building reputation and contextual intelligence, etc., it's underpinning, providing the data for a lot of our work. But here in the professional area, which is being a trusted counsellor, working with ethics, being a leader in the organization, self-development, AI is only just beginning to encroach and may not penetrate because public relations isn't a sum of all the tasks we do. You know, it's about the nature of the relationships that we create. And it's about, as Adrian was touching on, the culture that we have inside our organizations. And those are profound issues for us to work on, I think, within our organizations, to get away from this idea of we always have to be doing stuff. And the public relations shaped whole of the future is in governance. So we have to ask those questions about whether or not we're ready to step up to the plate in governance at a board level. Because all those questions that people ask of the organization will lie at our door as the people who have to answer those questions on behalf of our organizations. Things like, what are you doing with my data? All the tactical stuff. Oh, what are you doing? But the bigger stuff around, and what are you doing with your workforce? And how are you using AI for good in society? And how much energy are you using on your AI systems? Those are, you know, profound issues around governance, around which we will have to have answers. So it'd be better to be at the table, otherwise we'll be on the menu.
I love that quote, and I absolutely love that one. And we said at this stage what we wanted to do is share some of our tips, because it's really about, so what do we need to be doing now? And there's a real call to action that Anne just talked about. But maybe we could just go around and share a couple of tips each, and then we'll open up for questions. And what resonated for me when you were talking, Anne, is really this thing about calling it out. Is we need to have the voice, and we need to find our voice. And as our role is changing, and I remember we were in Bali at the World PR Forum, and we were having this conversation. And I'm sorry, I'm not giving away too much stuff here, but there was a slight frustration because we were talking about AI, and really a lot of our colleagues are looking at the tools and what can I use and how can I use the tool. And there was a real call out, I know, in the session that I was in, is should we be worried about AI? And I know a couple of the panelists were going, well, actually we shouldn't, because it's a tool that we can use and it's going to make us more efficient. But I said we should be worried, and we should be worried because of the events of last week, when we have a politician saying you offer no value. And that conversation is going to get greater. And that's my real concern here. So I think what we have to do is call it out, have an opinion, be able to talk about AI, and be able to talk about our role in much more tangible terms. I also think we need to be able to get on the front foot when it comes to responsible AI. One of my great analogies when I was with IABC many years ago was we're going to build the plane as we're flying it, and right now the AI plane is in flight, and we are building responsible AI. Don't wait for it. Start looking at building responsible AI frameworks, guidelines for your organization. There's no right or wrong now. It's about starting to put something in place. And as we get more research and information, we can mold those things over time. So that's a couple from me. And Bonnie, I'd love you to share your thoughts.
Bonnie, you go first. I've just spoken quite a lot.
Oh, okay. So for me, it really is about changing the narrative, because we're looking at AI adoption right now. Everybody's talking about how are you adopting AI. This is not about adopting AI. We do a lot of correlation with social media, et cetera. AI is different. AI is a new way of working and decision making. And we have to begin to tell our profession that. We have to begin to tell our organizations that this isn't just about adoption. This is about a new way of work and a new decision making. This is not a one-time change initiative. This is a continuous integration, and it's a culture evolution. This is not just internal, this is external. And AI as a tool, it's not a tool. It's part of our organization's DNA. And for those that are, so we have to guide that and lead that conversation so that people really get an understanding of what the future of an AI-driven world are. And those are some interesting ways to start that conversation. We need to define responsible AI in our organization and then call people accountable for it. As we look at that, sometimes it's very interesting for me to see, even if I'm looking at the tech and they wrote responsible AI a long time ago, and then you look at what they're doing, and it's pretty easy to say, that's not the way I define that. So it's not only putting in responsible AI policies, but getting common understanding of those definitions. And then for us, I think just continuing to have a North Star. And for now, I think the best North Star around responsible AI is around the Global Alliance guiding principles, which are totally underpinned by our profession's ethics, whether it's PRSA, CIPR, IABC, the Global Alliance ethics. They're all built on an ethical framework that gives us a foundation for what we stand for.
Okay, I absolutely agree. Thank you, Bonnie, for that. And Adrian, not getting seduced by the shiny toys is so important, as you mentioned, and we are prone to doing that. So a couple of things from me. I wonder how many people on this call have had formal ethics training, because still a tiny percentage of PR people have had formal ethics training. So it's difficult to lead in AI from an ethical perspective if you don't know your ethics. So I would really recommend that we do some catch up on ethical training really, really quickly. The second thing is, I think we need to think about our future role. So again, don't think about, I need to get to grips with all the content generation things. I showed you that capability framework. Our future role is in governance. So we need to think through carefully what that is. And I'd just like to finish by showing a couple of things. All the research so far says there are literally dozens and dozens of ethical codes and guides and everything else. The real issue is implementation. It's a bit like company values. You walk under the the wall that puts the 6 company values, you know, in big bold letters. These are our company values, and then you walk in the front door, and those values are left behind on the wall outside the company because it's not what's reflected inside. And so, just a couple of really practical things that I'll show you now about AI, and I'll just go back. Oops. If I can go back on here, my screen seems to have frozen. So I'll stop sharing that, and I'll try and do this another way. Sorry about this, folks. It always happens, doesn't it? When you, it all works beautifully when you're doing the, there we are. Now let me see if I can just share again. Really, I want to show you a couple of practical implementation frameworks because they're really, really helpful. So let me now go back to this. So this is the Open Data Institute's ethics canvas. So Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the internet, is involved with the Open Data Institute. And this is something on data ethics, which is close to our hearts. And they've come up with this ethics data canvas, and it takes you really practically through some of the ethical questions. So does this have positive effects on people? And it takes you through a series of questions, and it gets you to answer those questions. And then there's another one here. This is the Althea framework by Rolls-Royce, who makes aero engines, you might know, and they are looking at the social impact of AI here. They've got, again, a number of ethical themes there, and here is realization principles, and for you to fill in what you're doing in practical terms to realize your ethical aspirations. And the one that just came out last week, for those of you in the public sector, and a number of you are, Artificial Intelligence Playbook for the UK government. It's really, these are the principles, and it's all about you, what you need to know, and what AI is living on. Your ethical use of AI, using the right tool for the job. You can see here there's a whole series of topics that they come up with, and it's really practical guidance frameworks. So I'll say it again, ethical codes, frameworks, and we have to have them. I'm not dissing them at all. They have to be there, but the proof of the pudding is in the implementation. And therefore, those are just 1 or 2 really practical tools that you can use to crack on. And if you're able to show Rolls-Royce does it like this, Tim Berners-Lee does it like this, then that's great advocacy inside the organization. So it's not just you bleating on, as PR people do, it's saying these companies who are respected, these individuals who are respected, use these frameworks, we should be doing it too. And they're equally applicable to us in PR and comms.
Excellent. Thank you, Anne. We did have some questions. So when people registered for this session, there was some questions posed. I thought I might go through those now, and Anne, Bonnie, either of you or myself can answer those questions, and then let's open it up to everybody else, and then we'll share some resources and a final plea to get involved by doing the survey ready for the symposium. So we had a question from Mirko that said, given the energy required to run AI, how can we advise clients, employees to use it only as necessary when the mood promotes using it as much as possible? So people want to use it as much as possible, but how do we actually educate people around this one? Don't know whether Bonnie or Anne, did you feel you wanted to answer that one?
Get them to look at their electricity bill.
Yes, that'd change things.
I mean, the cost of energy these days, seriously, you know, I guess the challenge is they're expecting you to use your electricity. So maybe you ought to start submitting an invoice. You want me to use AI? This is the cost of using AI.
It's a really, really, really good tip.
And I think, these are the new disciplines. If you're working in consultancy, we're used to putting in client costs in. Well, this is the cost.
Yep.
You client want to save money because you want me to use AI because you think it's going to cost less in my labor.
Yeah.
So here are the energy costs.
Yep, I agreed. And also maybe we should be doing things like carbon footprint tracking and those things,
Yeah.
and putting some things in place with the organizations to their impact through AI. I'll take another question, either of you. Should PR industry bodies develop a global ethical framework for AI-driven climate messaging? What do you think it could include?
I think it's hard to do something around global when you've got countries like the United States that aren't playing nice on those initiatives and can and will not, and the US and the UK not signing on to the AI principles. So I think when you're looking at things from a global perspective, it's in the current political environment is very difficult.
Agreed. We had an interesting question from Janie, and I think we may have covered this as we've talked, but how can we ensure AI enhances communication while preserving empathy, nuance, and genuine connection? And I think that conversation for me is that conversation around that it is a support tool, not a replacement, I think is an important one, and that it is a human at the heart of everything that we do from an AI perspective. So right from tool development and implementation, we've always got that completely front of mind.
I think this book, Irreplaceable, is so interesting because it addresses a lot of that. It addresses, the humanics, the things that only humans can do. And if we're doing robotic things, they're going to be replaced. And so I think that empathy, the ability to build trust, et cetera, are the things that are truly AI, are truly human, truly things that we have to bring to the table. And I even think that it's one of the challenges with our CEOs that they really could use some help with, because when they are only looking at the numbers and they're going about life robotically, they are not showing empathy and the humanistic side of things, which sometimes it's very difficult for leaders to do. It's going to cause some challenges in the environment that they live in.
Absolutely. And I see some questions coming in chat. So if you guys also want to keep an eye out, I've got a few more that we got submitted, and I know we're running for time, so we'll keep these short. There was one from Rachel that said, how might AI be implemented in military communications, which I think is an interesting perspective, but one that's really front of mind, I guess, in the way that it's being AI is being used to, use in terms of warfare, and you've got the whole dissemination of misinformation and so on. But there's some advantages, in terms of strategic intelligence that you get from an analysis, and things like crisis response, I guess, are some of the things where it is being used for. But as we're finding probably across most governments, is the security of information, particularly in defense, is AI and use of AI within those organizations and how that information can get out. So we've got to be really robust in some of those ways that we protect information in those environments is probably one of my takes on that one. Stuart said, how transparent do you need to be if AI has been safely used for years but is now under scrutiny? I thought that was a very interesting question because it's so true. We're now in the frame in the last couple of years of Gen AI, but we've been using it for years. And have we been disclosing? Have we been open about the use of AI? Do we need to play catch up? Do we need to backtrack? What's your thoughts?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there are different interpretations of transparency. So, I'm an academic, so I do lots of boring things and sit at a desk reading lots of things. And I've looked at some of the AI codes in public relations, and there are different definitions of transparency. For example, in the ICO one, in the Global Alliance one, in the Irish Institute one, in the one that's just come out from IPRA. So it depends what you mean by transparency. Should you disclose if you're using AI? That yes. The point at which you should disclose is debatable. So if I use AI to come up, help me with a blank sheet of paper, do I declare that? If I get AI to do the crisis communication from start to finish by using an agent, should I disclose that? Well, everybody would say yes, but it's at what point do you disclose? I think this is really difficult. And I mentioned the AI rules, the EU new legislation, transparency there is very much about sort of the processes that you go through. But could we, as PR practitioners, honestly lay down an audit trail of all our uses of AI and open it up for inspection for the world to see? I wonder. There are far too many conversations behind closed doors. So I would say yes to your question, Stuart. It's just the point at which you disclose that I think is an interesting debate to be had. I always, when I worked in consultancy, I always thought it was best to just stick your hand up and say, I've done it.
Yeah.
And if you stick your hand up and say you've done it, most people then say, well, that's interesting. Or why, there's nothing, that's fine. There's nothing hidden. And that then builds trust.
And as I'll start sharing things, Anne, I'll start sharing the resources that we've put together. And we'll share these with the group as well as the recording. And I know a couple of people have asked for certificates for attendance today. So we'll work something out and send that to you as well. But just a really quick analogy, we had somebody call an organization last week, and they shared the story that they were talking to an AI bot, and they said, can I talk to a real person? And the bot replied, I'm offended that you think I'm not a real person. Disclosure, I think, is really, really important here.
I do think that there's, that we've gone a little long, Adrian and Anne, and we knew we would, because there would probably be lots of discussion, and I think we can have some discussions around this. But I'm looking at Catherine and Wayne's questions, and I did just want to put them, they're not questions, they're statements, and they're true. They're about, really, how do we stretch our advocacy? And Catherine's talking about, how do we stretch our advocacy around, the information discriminatory decisions that are being made because, banks and insurance companies, et cetera, are using data only. And we're seeing that in the United States, where we're having some challenges are being pushbacks that insurance companies are now pulling those decisions so that humans are making the final decisions. And then Wayne's talking about, the agentic AI, and how that's going to change the way we're doing things. So much bigger conversation, and to what level we lead that, and to what level we are stepping in from that perspective. So I think it's really important that we continue this conversation, that we are able to take our responsible AI through the Global Alliance to a second level. And that leads us to this survey that Adrian's put up that we hope you will take. And so that we can be a part of this continued conversation, because is it our job to step into those discriminatory conversations, those bias conversations, those conversations about transparency and what defining transparency? So we've talked about a lot of those things, and is it our job to stand up for job loss, against job loss? I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about, and this is why it's going to be a continual evolving, but we do have a voice as a profession, and we do carry influence, and to what level are we ready to step in and lead?
Thanks for that, Bonnie. So we're at overtime, and as it was always going to be. And thank you again for everybody joining. We'll go back through some of the questions or in the chat, and we'll try and answer those as we come back to you with the links for today's session and the resources that we have shared. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. It's been great to see you all.
Thank you.
Adrian, we might just put the Rolls-Royce framework in the resources